Hello and welcome to the Genetics Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Short. My background is in population genomics and studying the genetic causes of rare disease. I did my PhD at the Sanger Institute in the University of Cambridge and have been in biotech since 2018 when I started Sonogenetics. Sonogenetics helps academic and industry researchers to run large-scale genetic testing programs that speed up their clinical trials, generate data sets for the next big breakthrough, and give participants the best possible experience taking part in research. Each episode of the Genetics Podcast, we bring you insights from the leading minds in genetics and precision medicine, including household names and Nobel Prize winners, as well as early career scientists and biotechs working on the next big breakthrough. Whether you are a scientist, entrepreneur, executive, patient advocate, or simply someone curious about how genetics shapes our world, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Genetics Podcast today. I'm really excited to be here with Stevie Ringel, who's the founder and CEO of Nome Therapeutics and also the founder of the Kizuna Foundation. I'm going to let Stevie tell the full story, but just to give you a little bit of an intro, he was 17 when he was diagnosed with a rare retinal disease that caused progressive blindness. And I've been honestly amazed with how he's channeled this into not one, but two really impactful efforts, both the Kizuna Foundation and Nome. So we're going to talk a little bit about that journey, but also what he's really done to transform the potential for other patients with rare disease. So Stevie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
I won't do your story justice, so I would love if you could just give people a sense of, you take us back to that time when you were 17, what was happening, and then how you actually made the decision to take that experience and start to channel it into something that's been really impactful to a lot of people.
It was a really formative time for me. A long diagnostic odyssey, lots of things that clued me and my parents into the fact that something wasn't quite right with my vision. Ended up with a diagnosis clinically of some sort of retinal disease without a ton of clarity on exactly what it was, but clearly inherited retinal disease. And I'll never forget walking out of one of those clinical appointments, my dad turning around and asking the doctor, like, hey, can he drive? And the doctor's like, I don't know, figure it out. And that was a big deal for me because I was 17. I had just gotten my license. There was freedom. And that moment has stuck with me because it just demonstrated in a snapshot how little preparation there was or guidance there was for the moments after that diagnosis. And I've essentially dedicated my whole career to trying to resolve that and help families like mine through those moments since that point. It was made even more personal for me when my younger sister was diagnosed a few years after me with the same disease. So that was really, at that moment, I was like, okay, I have to do something about this. And I basically worked for the last 11 years at various precision medicine companies, multiple of which were privileged enough to go public, learning, how do we scale genomics into healthcare and that both the health system side and increasingly use them in the development of pharmaceuticals. So that's my background and my why.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about, I think the first organization that you started was the Kizuna Foundation. What did you want to achieve with that? And I think you're still helping run the organization today. Just talk a little bit about the KIZ variant that you and your sister carry. My understanding is it's ultra rare and probably opened your eyes to some of the challenges of drug development in the rarest of rare, where you're working today.
When I was at Illumina, actually, it was the early days of commercializing whole genome sequencing, and I was reading textbooks, and it was like, you can get a better diagnostic yield with whole genome. Okay, we should do this. And so I actually had my whole family go through and get whole genome, and we did get a diagnosis of the gene you mentioned, KIZ, which is ultra rare at the time, actually so rare. We thought we might be like N of ones, just that it had been just like really linked way back in my family's ancestry. Turns out it's a founder mutation in the Ashkenazi Jewish population. Both my parents are Ashkenazi Jewish. And there's about 200 patients globally. We know of 18 others in the US. So still a very, very rare and small population. During my time working in the industry, I kept seeing the advancements in genetic medicines. And for example, the first gene therapy for retinal disease, Luxturna, that Spark made, that came out for a different form of retinitis pigmentosa, which is kind of a banner condition for what we have. And so it was clear to me the science was advancing, but also with 200 patients globally, there was just simply no way traditional pharma was going to take on the development of this drug. And so we started Kizuna Foundation about 2 years ago with a pretty simple thesis. Science is here, capital's needed. And I'll tell you that was like a half correct thesis. Science is here. We are seeing good progress both in our program as well as many others that are trying to take advantage of genetic medicine technology. But the part that was maybe less correct was the balance that the capital was the blocker. And I'll tell you, it's always hard to raise capital in any format. Philanthropy is no different. We're super grateful for over 150 unique donors that have come to support Kizuna Foundation. We've raised about $500,000 in our time of existence, which is great. But what it showed me is that actually, like, the reason why we're not making faster progress is not due to capital. It's actually due to operational complexity. Like when we started the foundation, I made hundreds of phone calls to different scientists, researchers, clinicians, trying to figure out,
Yeah.
is gene therapy a good idea? What's the right way to make a gene replacement construct? What type of testing do I need to go down a smaller, like at this point, there was no N of one plausible mechanism pathway that was really even draft established. So what's the regulatory path? All these questions that we had about getting our plan in order that were really important because we needed to communicate this to ourselves internally as a board, the team that we were funding, as well as our donors to tell them where their money was going and why it was going to make a difference. And so the reality that both the single plan development was difficult and the day-to-day operational management of people we ended up funding took a lot of time and there was lots of details and complexity. That was kind of the realization that, kind of kicked off an idea that, hey, maybe the real blocker here is operational complexity, not capital.
Mhm. And how early on were you starting to think about a company? You've worked at some of the most important genetic medicine service providers, Semaphore, acquired by GeneDx, Tempus, Illumina, you mentioned, and I know you were working closely with pharma companies that were developing probably oncology and rare disease drugs that relied very heavily on genetics. As during that part of your career, were you thinking, actually, I'd like to start a company at some point? When did you get the itch and get the idea to start Nome?
In terms of like my personal background in thinking about forming a company, like not really. I think I've always gravitated towards solving the hardest possible problems. Like that's what brings me immense satisfaction is um, really trying to look at something from a different perspective and angle that's been a long existing, very important, significant problem in a big important field, and trying to be really creative and attacking it in a different way. And so I often think about like what I'm doing now in building a company is really a creative act of creative problem solving and trying to use different elements of my personal background in this unique moment in time to address something that's been long underserved. So I can't say I was always thinking, let me start a company, but I was always thinking, I want to have high impact by doing something difficult and meaningful. In terms of, how do we get to know itself? It's really following on from what I was telling you about starting Kizuna Foundation. Like as I was doing it and I was seeing it was just so difficult to operate. It was, a few things struck me. First, it wasn't just me. I
Yeah.
talked to a lot of other parents and foundation leaders and clinicians who are building drugs in an academic setting. Everyone was having this problem, and it came down to the fact that even if you were doing it full time, but most were a collection of part time parents doing this work. Even if you had a PhD, though many didn't, it just like the rigor of doing a drug development program is extraordinarily high, as all of your listeners will know. Making a drug is not for the faint of heart, and so you really need a dedicated team. And then second, it was just so clear that the existing resources and infrastructure didn't exist. Big pharma use big CROs. There's no equivalent for foundations and individual families trying to take this emerging kind of field on and take the matter into their own hands for building small batch drugs. And then lastly, because of my background, I was able to put those problem statements together and think about how might AI change the equation. And for us, when we say AI, we don't mean trying to predict novel mechanism or do something like protein fold. That's the realm of DeepMind and people that are significantly more advanced and have billions of dollars of compute available. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how do you use teams of AI agents that can collectively give our team of PhD scientists superpowers in their day-to-day by managing lots of the day-to-day operational program management, administrative work that has scientific elements to be sure, but really that's the stuff. We think it's about 60% of people's time is just the day-to-day management of these programs. So we kind of had
Yeah.
this idea if we can get the best people in the world to work on these types of programs and we give them superpowers, we're going to be able to help a lot of people in a business model and a cost model that makes sense for these smaller foundations. And when we put kind of that unique moment in time together, the genetic medicines were here, my personal problem statement, and then the growing kind of field of artificial intelligence and its capabilities, those three elements kind of came together. And that's when we got the idea to start the company Nome, which was kind of spring of 2025, and said, we can be this operating system, if you will, for genetic medicines. And we've been really off to the races since then.
Yeah, and I want to dive into you have I always like to understand what's behind the name of a company. You have a really cool story that is a nod to something that more than 100 years ago, there was I think a diphtheria outbreak in a remote part of Alaska, and there was a sled dog mission to go more than 600 miles to get the treatment to the children that were suffering out there. And I love this as a metaphor for the journey that either an individual rare disease patient is on, or a group of patients or a community. And I wanted to ask you about the sled dog equivalent. Are you thinking it's about helping one patient find their path, and is that where you're starting? Or are you thinking about working with foundations like Kizuna and others, where maybe you get a group of a couple hundred patients worldwide and can help them chart a path? Like, how do you think about the trade-offs between where you focus on those two and where the opportunities are today?
Well, you're right on the name, first off. I'm so glad you're familiar with the story. I think it's a really powerful one. It's actually the base to the movie Balto, which I loved as a kid. It's kind of
Me too.
it's a great one. I actually have a husky here at home named Balto because I love it that much.
Oh, cool.
And so I was all in on this concept and this metaphor. And then for us, the reason we chose the name Nome rather than Balto or one of the children's, anything like that, was because for us this is the ephemeral destination of the company. We often say, like, let's get to Nome or onwards to Nome, and to us that represents the destination of the point where we have a truly personalized healthcare system.
Yeah.
That really is calibrated for each person and leaving nobody behind. And so when you ask your question about are we here for the one patient? Are we here for the groups of patients? I mean, the answer is yes to both. Practically, the audience that we serve today, our customers, are both individual families with one or two kids affected in their family, as well as small and mid-sized patient advocacy group foundations that are usually looking after several hundred kids. We also think that in the distant future, there's no reason the technology and platform we're building can't serve the very large companies, the Eli Lilly's of the world with genetic medicine platforms that are looking at commercial size indications. Our view is the set of capabilities required is the same. The goal is the same, which is that every single child, we should not be giving up on them. We should not be stymied by the blizzard. We should find a new way to and through the challenge to bring them medicine. And so that's kind of how we think about it, as well as where we're starting today.
I had the honor of speaking with Timothy Yu a couple of episodes back, and people who aren't familiar, please go back and listen to the episode. But he's been a trailblazer in N of 1 therapies, and he shared something that was really interesting, which was the unexpected logistical hurdles around manufacturing the first therapy they worked on. And I wanted to ask you a similar question of you. There's some things you knew coming into this of what would be hard, but there were probably some big surprises. And for the benefit of people who are thinking about, I'm an individual, I'm a parent, or I'm a foundation trying to chart this path through the wilderness, what are some of the things that surprised you in terms of challenges that you've learned from?
Tim's got a great perspective on this, and he certainly is a leader. He's probably right on that challenge. I'd add, I hate to say it this way, but the inconsistent urgency across the field, I think, surprises me. Maybe not surprises, but it's been one of the things as we try to build a scalable business around this field and help more and more families. Has been something that I hope we start to kind of get more momentum behind. Because I hate to say it this way, but we're talking in August here. People go on vacation as they should, and people have lives to live. But at the same time, there are sick kids that we've got to get treatments to. And so I think, I guess maybe the relative value of having a full-time dedicated team who's incentivized to really push a program forward at all, every hour of the day, if you will, how much just that counts in progress compared to everything else on the board. Just that level of focus and dedication, it is actually probably the biggest X factor in how quickly these programs can move, or the biggest reasons why they're blocked. It's simply things like weeks to turn contracts and difficulty getting MTA signed. If your audience is familiar with trying to move human specimen, between labs or gosh forbid, between different countries, that's a really big challenge. But it's possible. But you got to have people on both sides who are willing to move on that paperwork. And so, I think what we've learned consistently is that urgency wins the day. And that if we can continue to build an organization at Nome that acts with patient level urgency, even as we scale, we embed that at every level of the organization's culture. That's going to really be a difference maker, both for us as a company, but far more importantly for the patients and families we serve.
As we think about how this grows from small batch, like you're talking about, to eventually becoming really scaled and commercially viable, I'm sure most people who are listening to this are thinking about high cost, whether it's ASOs, gene editing, gene therapy. These are traditionally expensive to manufacture, expensive to develop. How do you think about scale? How do you think about breaking that cost curve? I'm sure it's on your mind.
It is really expensive, and we're really cognizant of that when we're talking about serving individual families, patient groups, health systems. We know that in addition to all of the operational complexities I mentioned, cost is a real barrier. And, the only way to actually get the level of impact we want is to bring costs down. What's interesting to us is that the only way costs can come down is through scale. Like that's just true in every business forever. You think about, what business like Walmart or Amazon has done in retail, right? Why are things cheaper? It's because of the scale they're operating at. Amazon's a really interesting one. If you think about our business in a similar light, essentially what Amazon built was last mile logistics, and a lot of like warehouses that had really strong software first operations that allowed them to be significantly more efficient at a higher scale and delivering, retail to your doorstep. We think about ourselves as building something similar. The reason why is because if you say, okay, I want to go operate at scale, that sounds great. I want to reduce costs in gene medicine. The first thing you'll say is like, well, how many people do I need to do that? And how complex are all these different programs? And like, how do I manage that? And how do we write like, before there's a clear path to reimbursement on these small batch drugs, like how could I ever underwrite that business model? It becomes immediately, blocked to work at scale based on the complexity of every program and the human capital that requires. And that's precisely why Nome, our whole perspective is to build AI agents that can really give our scientist operators superpowers and give them a ton of leverage in their day-to-day work, because that's what allows us to operate those programs at scale. And our view is because we're building a technology platform, it allows us to handle far more programs, far faster, with far fewer human beings in the loop than any other approach. That allows us then, when we go into things like GMP manufacturing, to start to batch these programs, potentially have a consistently owned clean room suite that would drastically reduce the cost of building these programs compared to today when you're building an N01 therapy and you're kind of relegated to, off-cycle swing times and, you hope that they're being generous on pricing, but that's not a guarantee you can build a business around. And so, our view is we've got to consolidate demand to operate the way that a bigger player, works. And the only way to actually be able to handle that on the day-to-day execution front is by building a technology platform. So that's the whole reason we exist, in other words.
And I guess the regulatory piece, which we touched on, is important here, right? Because if the FDA requires you to run a trial for every new molecule, then that breaks that paradigm potentially as well, right? Where if you can align this with a regulatory stance that's a little bit more permissive to N-of-1 therapies, that must help too, right?
That definitely helps, reduce the overall end-to-end cost to get a patient a therapy is, what regulators are looking for in terms of preclinical packages, as well as, the types of endpoints they're looking to collect and which time points from a clinical trial standpoint in the organization there. And so, I've seen a lot of, positive signals coming out of the FDA. I think, other countries, candidly, are moving really fast here too. And I think that creates a nice global competition. Biotech is global, increasingly so. I think over the past year to 2 years, as your listeners really know, China has emerged as a key player in biotech, and you've seen many deals coming there. And so, whether it's China, whether it's regulatory zones like in Australia and New Zealand that groups are increasingly going to for these trials, with strong tax credits in Australia as an incentive. Like there are different jurisdictions that are all kind of competing for this book of business in clinical and preclinical R&D. And so I think that America has always risen to the challenge and tried to be the most competitive and favorable place to build. And so we're encouraged by the signals that FDA has put out to continue allowing for the streamlining of these types of programs.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I guess from a business model perspective, the return of the RPV or the PRV rather is it also helps, right? And almost, I imagine it must be part of your strategy or any rare disease biotech strategy, right? The priority review vouchers is what I'm referring to.
It's interesting. It's part of my strategy at Kizuna Foundation as the funder of this type of therapy. And it's something that we put in front of our donors to say, look, we're not going to ask you for money forever. We've got a strategy
Yeah.
to become sustainable over time. But for Nome, we're actually not taking, molecule IP. We're a services company. The foundations we work with, they own the program. They
Oh,
would be the
interesting.
ones to generate and benefit from a PRV or their future pharma partners. And so for us, it's something that enables us to have more customers that we can actually serve
Yeah.
because there's more interesting sustainable business models. But we view that at Nome as an enabler. My foundation, it's something that allows me to tell a story to conventional philanthropists that I think is novel and unique.
Yeah, amazing. I know one of the things you offer today is you basically help patients to navigate their way towards a more personalized therapy so they can give you information like a genetic test report and then help get expert, AI generated, but then expert reviewed guidance on what options there might be. And I think this is a brilliant idea. And I'm curious what you've learned from that AI expert handoff. Like where is AI really shining? Where do the experts need to step in and fact check thing? It's probably changed a lot in the year and a half since you launched the company in a dramatic way. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
It's a story of leverage. So right now at Nome, any patient or clinician can go on their website, and which is www.nome.bio, and they can submit their genetics. We ask them some clinical symptom questions, and then we will give them a free report. That report goes over trials, other people's pipelines. Like for example, in Lorem or Boston Children's Hospital might have a drug on a given gene. We want to direct people there, rather than
Yep.
spend time making their own program. So we'll send them to the right point of care, or we'll tell them we think it's roughly 93% of patients have no options at all in development, and about 25% of them are great candidates for an existing programmable medicine. And we'll tell them that with the score of confidence interval and usually 20, 25 papers of literature citing kind of the scientific rationale. We'll give them that report for free. So that's our model, and we'll do that for anyone. We've looked at over 5,000 patient cases now in roughly a year. As we've done those 5,000, one thing is still true, which is we have an MD PhD that reviews every single program case or every single report before it goes out. We just feel like that's the right way to ensure that there is bottom line accountability and quality, and that every single patient that receives something from Nome, it's accurate. I will tell you what's changed is the amount of time that our MD
Yeah.
PhD has to spend per report. We've built an AI system now that we think is on our current internal benchmarks, 97% accurate on the task of scoring therapeutic modality and doing this literature type citation work. Just for context for your listeners, when we actually had a collaborator do a bake off against Opus 4.7, Claude's model, about 2-3 months ago, and it was 81% accurate out of the box. And our view is like that gap, 97 versus 81. It sounds maybe small on paper, but it's actually the gap between being able to mostly automate a workflow and trust this thing and think about it in a clinical adjacent decision support versus like it's a cool research tool, but also we have to fact check every last thing. So we've
Yeah.
built a much better model as we've looked at every case. We've also built kind of a tool bench, if you will, that allows for the MD PhDs on our team to really analyze and fact check each kind of report much more quickly and efficiently. And so now it takes us roughly 10 to 15 minutes to review what the AI is coming out with. The AI can actually go through hundreds of cases a day. And so it allows us to really scale up. And when we're talking to individual families, it's great because we can give them insights really quickly. This is a very fresh thing for them. They don't want to sit on their hands for 2 months not hear anything back from us. They want to, usually in about a week, they'll get a free report back from us. And it's like almost a therapeutic benefit from an emotional standpoint to that family to have something so quickly that's comprehensive. But then also we think about this from a clinical standpoint. And right now we're engaging with a number of different health systems saying, no, trust us, like bring us your full clinic. Like we can do it, trust us. How many people have you seen in the last year in your clinic? Bring them to us, but back up the brace truck. We, by the way, are HIPAA compliant, we're outside of the AA. We've done all the good things to make sure that we're protecting data and acting as a good partner should. But we can actually go through all these cases, not just on an individual one-off basis, but actually then force rank, the most eligible patient cases per modality to the least eligible. And why that matters is because a lot of these health systems actually have grants, or they have therapists in the local community, or they'll build patient assistance fund, people that are saying, hey, we do want to take on custom ASO building at our health system. It's something that we do want to fund, but who do we do it for? We don't just want to do it necessarily for the people that are asking us about it, the loudest oil, or might have the deepest pockets. We want to, in a kind of a near at first need blind way, we want to be thinking about who is the best patient that we could possibly make an impact on here by taking on this case. And so we're able to do that for them holistically from A to Z in the clinical setting at a very, very high scale, which we think is really important as we think about the appropriateness of these therapies in a clinical reimbursable context over the next 5 to 10 years.
In terms of the improvements that you've made on the underlying model, are you, and I'm going to get a little bit into the technical weeds here, but are you fine-tuning a model, or is this more coming from data input sources and the human in the loop? I'd just love to learn a little bit more about how you get, how you achieved the accuracy that's above some of the frontier scale models, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we're pretty open about our secret sauce because I always say, like, the best case scenario is a lot of people kind of think about rare disease in a similar way and solve more problems. For us, we haven't built our own models, if you will, and we're not spending a whole lot of time tinkering with things like model weights and things like this. We're building majority on top of frontier models. We use actually most of the frontier models. We found them to be more useful for certain tasks over time, and there's different cost trade-offs. So we're using premium tokens, but in different ways at different times. Most of the secret sauce is in 2 places. One, it's the architecture and the harnessing of these agents, like to actually get an output consistently.
Right.
It's reliable and benchmark. You have to build evals. You have to build kind of architecture frameworks that allow agents to be called and have them call specific tools in the same way every time in a very constrained way. And that I think is a big difference. At CSE, I read probably a paper a week of some group that publishes open source code and it says they're really good at X or thinks they can spin up a model that says they can do Y. That works for 1 or 2 or 5 cases, but to actually be able to have the trust of the community to handle thousands of cases at scale in a clinical adjacent setting, you got to have that reliability. And so that kind of the framework that we've built helps there. And then the other piece of it is just kind of the fact that we've been able to fund a business where we have a business model that supports the ability to annotate every single one of those cases. Like not only when our MDKG reviews these cases, not only are we correcting them to make sure that they're accurate for patients, we correct them a lot less today. A lot of them are actually really, really good coming off the press. But that's because we annotate every case and we're able to feed that back to our engine. And it's really that set of proprietary data now where we think we are an order of magnitude leader in the number of cases we've looked at, and then also the richness and density of the review notes. That's what kind of feeds into some of the secret sauce of the model. And so, I don't think, I guess my background, as you mentioned a little bit, coming from places like Semaphore and Tempest, these are always data flywheel businesses. You're figuring out in healthcare, how can I perform a useful service that has a sustainable business model behind it, and at the same time then use that to generate a data stream that consistently improves my product and makes it better and better. And so we feel like our business model might actually be the secret sauce more than any of the technical pieces that allow us to continue advancing capabilities for the rare disease community.
Yeah, it's super cool. Thanks for the peek under the hood. I think it's really interesting. And it's good that you share because everybody is learning how to do these things at the same time, and especially in healthcare, we're all in a race against the clock, not in competition with each other, right? It's good to figure out how to use these tools as effectively as possible, as quickly as possible. I wanted to ask about your view on therapeutic modalities as well. So you have, you described this flywheel. You have, I think, a lot of patients that are coming in looking for help. If we think about something like, N. Lorem Foundation you mentioned, or other N
Mhm.
of one therapies, one of the big challenges is just not most patients can't be helped, both because of the scalability of where it is today, but also the nature of the underlying genetic cause. But then we also have gene editing coming down the pipeline. We have gene therapies. I'd love to get your perspective on what are the most promising modalities to help more of the kind of patients that come through a platform like yours over the next 5, 10 years.
Great question. Delivery is the hard problem, always. It has been for the last decade, 2 decades. It will be for the next decade. And I think the reason why is because, the number of diseases we've cured in cells and mice and animals, when you can control delivery or proxy delivery, especially, things like, neuro, where you can do burrow-based, there's just it shows you just how much delivery matters in getting to an effective and safe dose in humans. Unfortunately, what I try to share with families is a lot of the toxicity effects that are the risks of gene therapy in humans come down to like the fact that we don't have like a Goldilocks zone on dose where you have enough for potency and efficacy, but not too much viral load to cause kind of safety issues. And so I think that expanding that kind of target area, if you will, from from a transduction side, from a kind of a viral spread side, that's great. Can we detarget different organ systems in a way that's safer? And then can we, of course, expand payload capacity for things like editors and gene therapies, or can we build dual vector systems that can kind of work on larger genes? So I think at point of delivery, I think a real open question right now is what's going to happen in two key areas. One is the blood-brain crossing capsids. There's a number of companies working on these right now. Apertura, Dino are two of the leaders there that we know well, and how they're thinking about how do we go forward into humans and demonstrate that these capsids are not just safe but actually improve therapeutic outcome. And so I think the whole field is watching really closely to see if those are going to yield a better outcome compared to traditional 89 type approaches for CNS to AAV therapies. And then the other one is non-viral. So, LMPs, of course, have become much more well known post-COVID vaccine. And you're also seeing LMPs be effective in cases like baby KJ that was published a little bit over a year ago now, using RNA-based wrapping strategies. So there's I think a push towards thinking about where can we use non-viral based delivery effectively, and right now there's a limited number of organ systems where that works. And so I think that one or both of those things are going to have to really progress effectively in order for us to see a more pervasive spread of the great work on the payload side, which I'm not minimizing. We need better payloads, but it's always seemed to me that the delivery innovation is the thing that's the rate limiter in our field.
Yeah. What do you think about the commercial side of rare disease? It's also, especially the rarer it gets, the more challenging it becomes. What have you learned, not just through Nome, but more broadly in your career about how we could tackle that problem?
Well, it's interesting. I think um, a lot of it comes down to capitalization models. And so, when we started Nome as an example, we pitched a bunch of therapeutics investors. And I think the common refrain, and I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, but like it was, you're choosing between, a bet on a new reimbursement model and being able to find like the next 10 patients to make the cost model work on a very small batch therapy versus going after a more traditional blockbuster where the path is more established and the economics are more established. And that was kind of always a tougher sell. And so most of Nome's backers really come from healthcare services or tech-enabled services or a tech bio background, and are thinking about the capital bet differently and thinking about the infrastructure we build as a secret sauce versus any one molecule. And so that's, I guess, my lived example of thinking about aligning capital and the types of risk that they want to underwrite to your business model. And I think we've seen that happen in waves in biotech life sciences over time. My hope is that we're in a moment now where, given the excitement around artificial intelligence and given the fact that everyone recognizes that biology is one of the biggest, hardest problems out there, where AI could make one of the biggest differences, we've kind of permanently broken the glass and brought textile investors and textile builders into our space. Because I think not only will that allow for access to different capital and capital models, but also allow for different kind of talents, building different types of businesses with different perspectives that really will usher in the era of disruption and innovation that we need.
Last question for me as we wrap up here is really just to learn a little bit more about what's next for you all. If you look forward next couple of years, what are the big things on your mind that would make you look back and be really happy with what you've achieved?
Well, for Nome, the biggest next milestone is advancing our programs to clinical dosing. Just kind of started opening up our doors to patients in the winter of 2026. And so we've seen tremendous interest and demand from both individual families and patient advocacy groups. And that demand keeps scaling. Like they keep coming to us. So we're really excited about that. And we've seen our impact at being able to move things more quickly and efficiently in preclinical stages already. The question will be, how do those drugs translate when we actually think about dosing patients? And so hopefully that will happen for us over the next few years here, and we'll be able to come back to you, Patrick, and have a really awesome conversation about what the full end-to-end life cycle of building a small batch therapy looks like in the infrastructure we built to enable that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And maybe just I'll sneak in one more question I just want to get a sense of the modalities you're going after. Are these all ASOs? Because one of the challenges as well is complexity around pursuing many different modalities at once. I'm curious about where you're starting.
Yeah, we're doing both ASOs and gene therapy and actually gene editing too.
Cool.
For us, we started off thinking we were only going to do kind of splice switching ASOs and try to really isolate that. And we found two things. Number one, there's only so many diseases that can clearly benefit from that. And so we didn't feel like our impact was as strong as it needed to be to really enact the vision of the company, which is every patient getting a personalized medicine, no matter how rare the disease. And then second, we actually learned that the hard part to organize the company around is the process. And so, yes, there's a different, set of experiments to run, different vendors and partners to work with, different regulatory agencies, CDER and CBER, right? So
Yes.
There are absolutely differences, but we felt like those differences were, in the end of the day, smaller than the differences or the consistency in the process excellence we had to build. And so we really focused in the company of thinking about what does it mean to build a small batch drug for N=1 or N=few or orphan designation. What does that mean from a regulatory pathway perspective? What does that mean in terms of the types of experiments you want to set up and run, and how we think about endpoints and natural history in those population sizes? Aligning the company to those consistencies, that's been our core focus. And that's allowed us then to be diverse in terms of things like modality, indication, where we serve both neurology, retinal, and muscular patients, and kind of let those other variables be more fluid as we really focused on process excellence. So the thing we pushed out of scope is serving kind of large commercial indications today. We've really tried to focus our process around what does it mean to try to really serve patients like myself and my sister and our group of 200 that have no other options. We're super honored to do it. We love the impact that creates, and we also think it is a really interesting, defensible core business.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, congratulations on all the progress, and like you said, I would love to connect and talk about the next chapter once you have some data back from these programs. It's a really exciting time. Thanks for sharing it with us and for dedicating your time to this.
Oh, my pleasure, and thanks so much to all of the patients and clinicians that trust us, and to our team for making it happen, and thanks to you for having me and letting us share the story.
It's my pleasure. It's so great to meet you. Thanks, everyone, as always, for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, as always, for tuning into the Genetics Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, the best way you can support the show is by sharing it with a friend or colleague who might find it interesting as well. We'd also really appreciate if you could subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps other people discover the show when they're searching for content on genetics, precision medicine, or biotech. We always want to hear from you as well. If you have feedback or questions or want to be featured on the show, you can email us at podcast@sonogenetics.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Patrick Short. You can find us as well, Sonogenetics, on LinkedIn, or reach out on Instagram at The Genetics Podcast. And finally, a special thank you to the team behind the show who makes this possible. Joy Ismail produces and manages the show, and James Pierce from Selective Frequencies for his expert audio engineering. I'm Patrick Short, your host. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Genetics Podcast.